Congratulations, Gary Bettman, Hockey Hall of Fame commissioner that you are. New CBA has been ratified, done, and dusted. And some of the interesting tidbits that have come out is an 84-game season is coming to the NHL as part of an extension of the CBA that has been tentatively agreed to by the league and the NHLPA. What can you tell us about how quickly this came together? Are you surprised that they were able, both sides, the league and the PA, were able to sit in a room, find commonality, and here we are reacting to a new CBA and a very healthy NHL.
Yeah, well, the negotiations hadn't yet started at the Four Nations in mid-February, but they were about to start. So I'm assuming they started preliminary discussions as of early March. And yeah, most of the pieces were in place by late June. So they weren't ready to present all of it, but they definitely presented the key rule changes, and everybody seemed to be in favor of it. And then it was ratified earlier last week. And I think, from a fan perspective, the fact that you don't have a threat of a lockout, which this fan base, the NHL fan base, has been unfortunately privy to more than most leagues in North America. At least you could rest easy until 2030. Now, my deal here is this CBA seems to be very much in favor of owners, right? Contract lengths got reduced.
Yeah.
Yes, the players, now no longer have a dress code. That's a win for them. And yes, the players no longer have to pay into workers' comp, which I found very weird, and that's taken off. But then, the double retention has been tweaked. So in the past, you could trade a player at retain 50%, trade him to another team. That team would retain 50%, and then you trade him to the final destination. So a player that was making $10 million would count for $2.5 million, in terms of prorated, or if you're using LTI or the full amount, 2.5.
Right.
So you can't do that anymore on the same day. There's a 75-day rule where you can retain on a player, and then you have to wait 75 days to retain on them again. And again, there's only a maximum of 2 retentions you can do on one contract. But here's the kicker. If you retain on that player at trade deadline, 75 days, there's not 75 days between trade deadline and the end of the season. So what happens? You pause the counter, lasts the whole summer, and then start day one of the NHL season and start the counter up again. So that means that even if you trade a player with retention at the trade deadline, you can't even trade them with retention again,
right,
until like the first 2 months of the season.
But to counter that, to counter that, isn't the shorter contract situation better for star players? Like, I believe hockey is better when there's more gossip, when there's more speculation. Like Austin Matthews as an example, 4 years. Like, what's going to happen in year 3 of a 4-year deal? You and I are going to be talking about, the Leafs going to lose their generational talent. Like, I believe player movement in pro sports is better for the game because it gets more people talking and it gets more people speculating. And I think it just makes for a more exciting product. So is that a valuable counter argument to suggest that, maybe not to the extreme of the NBA where players dip in, for 2 years and then get another supermax for another 2 years? I think a 4-year kind of contract could be dangerous because the Canadiens have a superstar and his name is Lane Hudson. They potentially have a budding superstar in Ivan Demidov. And so be careful what you wish for, because I believe in this instance, if a player doesn't like how the team is being built in year 3 of a 4-year deal, you've seen 3 seasons, maybe that's enough. Player empowerment to me is a good thing, Marco. Your perspective on the shorter contracts.
I agree. But at the end of the day, it's the star players are always going to get paid one way or the other. Always going to get paid. But I think this significantly hampers the security of the second and third wave of tiered of players. And I think that's where I feel like it kind of sucks for them. But on the flip side, if the salary cap continues to increase as aggressively as it does, there is a benefit to it as well. And we're only knocking off a year. So to me, 8-year contracts are done. Now, if you hold that player's rights as of the trade deadline, it's 7 years. And if you try to sign him as a free agent, it's 6 years maximum, effective July 1st, 2026. But that's not the thing that that gets me. The thing that gets me is the limitation on signing bonuses.
Okay.
And I think that's the thing that I was talking to a couple of agents about this. That's the thing that's going to impact Canadian teams the most. And so, let's walk through memory lane. When you look at Noah Dobson's contract, it is so front-loaded with signing bonuses galore. I think like $12 million in signing bonus in his first year. The new CBA states, and all these contracts that were signed before are grandfathered, so don't worry about it. But any contract signed July 1st, 2026 cannot have more than 60% of the total revenue in the total contract and given year be a signing bonus cannot account for more than 60%. So if you look at a guy like Vladislav Gavrikov, who signed in with the Rangers, I think he's got a $1 million signing bonus, $1 million salary, and the rest is like 10 or $11 million in signing bonus. That cannot happen. It would have to be more along the lines of like, if it's a $10 million payout, $4 million in salary, $6 million in signing bonus. Now, why does that impact Canadian clubs? Well, if you look at Austin Matthews' contract right now, Austin Matthews' contract
signed for 4 years,
but very signing bonus heavy, right? And I think that's the key.
Because McDavid too opted for shorter. I'm unfamiliar with the signing bonuses.
No, he went 8 years. He went 8 years. But if you look at the total salary structure, this is fantastic work by Judd Moldover. Also a co-agent for Noah Dobson, so this kind of makes sense here. But Wasserman has figured out how to do this. Austin Matthews last season was the first year of his new contract, $13.2 million contract, but he had a base salary of $775,000. How much do you think he had in signing bonuses?
Crazy.
You ready?
Yeah.
$15.9 million in signing bonuses. Ladies and gentlemen, why? Why would a team do that? And the reason why a Canadian team would do this is so granular that you literally have to be an accountant to figure this out. So thank you, Mom. This is what happens here. A signing bonus, as pertained to the trade agreement between the United States and Canada, is seen as a performance yearly signing bonus. There was some debate about this that we saw with John Tavares, for example, who was being pursued by the CRA. They've since lost that battle, and I think this will set a precedent. But because signing bonuses can be taxed in a different setting than where the player plays, it brings about a whole new dynamic. Austin Matthews is from the state of Arizona. As we know, the state of Arizona does not have state tax. So his signing bonus would not be taxed at the 52% that you would be paying in Toronto. It would be taxed to simple baseline federal tax in Arizona, saving him on $16.7 million in salary. It would save him, I believe, somewhere upwards of $4 million in taxes a year.
Good for him.
That is the advantage that Canadian teams had to compete with the no tax states, because a player would be able to set up their dwelling in the United States in a tax friendly state, and then would be able to back channel the CRA in that way. That's exactly what John Tavares did. He was I believe he was naturalized in the United States because he had played at least 7 years on Long Island. So all you have to do is set up a dwelling like Matt Duchene did in Nashville, and then everything you sign after that, all the signing bonuses are on Tennessee tax or Florida tax, as a lot of athletes do. And so the Canadians did this with Noah Dobson. If you look at Noah Dobson's contract, and again, same agency, so they clearly know what they're doing here, but so does a guy like Kent Hughes, who's been making these contracts for a long time. But if you look at Noah Dobson, $1 million base salary this season, $11 million signing bonus.
Crazy.
And this is the case for the first 3 years of his contract.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to front-loaded limitations as well, because that's coming. But this significantly hampers specifically Canadian teams, because including signing bonuses like this are lockout proof.
Yeah.
So
Right.
there's that security involved as well. So now the players kind of gave up that lockout proof kind of agenda with that, but at the same time, they would be able to use the signing bonuses to at least create some equilibrium in the tax disparity between no tax states and high tax states. And this also applies, for example, to the state of California and the state of New York vis-a-vis their other American counterparts. So it creates a kind of situation where things get mucho complicated in terms of taxes.
Well, I know my eyes are glossing over listening to all. My eyes are glossing over.
But if you pay 20% in tax and 52% in tax on $10 million, that's 30% difference. That's the $3 million saving.
And you know what? The real ones will know this because you're probably in my head. When I'm listening to Marco kind of break it down, I'm like, yeah, I see. This guy's he goes to the Cayman Islands. I get it. It all makes sense. One of these tax havens there. Go back on the channel, Marco from the Cayman Islands. I'm kidding, of course. What about this? Well, I want to close out the CBA talk on the fact that I remember the Dougie Hamilton quote. We lost to a team that was $16 million over the salary cap in the playoffs. This is a big win, right? I'm also skeptic in terms of the very sharp guys are going to find another loophole as they did with this one, with the Mark Stones, the Kucherovs, the Patrick Kanes, exploiting Matthew Tkachuk, exploiting this type of no salary cap in the playoffs. I think this is a great move for hockey that now you're hurt or not, you count against the cap in the playoffs.
No, actually you don't. And I think this is where more discussion needs to happen on this. You have to deliver your 20-man roster, and that 20-man roster, the average of the 20-man roster has to be cap compliant.
Yes.
So if you have a player on LTIR that suddenly comes back to life on day one of the playoffs, like we've seen in the past, that player counts against the cap if you try to use him. Now you may see some what's the word here, shenanigans where they're gonna have a rotation. So basically, on day one of the playoffs, you have to provide the NHL your 20-man roster, and the average of that total salary has to be cap compliant. But as of game 2, you can still add and remove players at will. So you can have a pool of players to choose from, and you can rotate some of these players in and out depending on their salary. So as long as you're cap compliant with the 20-man roster that you would put on the ice, then you're fine. Now, here's the issue. That's not how it works during the regular season. So you can reach the playoffs, be cap compliant because you used LTIR, and then get to your 20-man roster. And as long as your 20-man roster is compliant, no problem. So that means
that was the change then. Okay. I wasn't sure. Okay.
So with that, it opens the door for some potential loophole.
Shenanigans. Yeah,
but for all intents and purposes, this was used to limit putting high-priced players like Mark Stone or Patrick Kane or and we've seen it with Matthew Tkachuk on LTIR and being able to use large sums of money to bring that roster with you into the playoffs. And so that is dead. That you cannot do because you like a team that could benefit and take advantage of a situation like this would have to use LTR and be over the cap by like 1 or 2 or 3 million. That's okay because you can again rotate some of these players out. Like for example, if you're the Edmonton Oilers last playoffs, and you could have brought in an extra $2-3 million of players because you'd be able to use LTIR, but then you just don't dress a guy like Skinner, for example, who was making $3 million. And was like being used as like a fourth line player because they didn't have a role for him. Well, you just don't put him on your 20 player list, and then you can bring in another guy that potentially could have made more of a difference. So that's where the difference is. If you're using LTIR and you have a higher price player that's just occupying place and isn't really helping you, well, not a problem. Another example would be the Canadiens. Say the Canadiens trade Patrick Laine at 50% and get under the cap and no changes happen to this roster. They get into the playoffs. They can maximize Carey Price's LTIR. Why? Because Carey Price isn't going to be dressed.
Yeah, right. Right.
So teams
He's not the
utilizing
original
LTIR,
20. Right.
exactly.
Gotcha.
Teams utilizing LTIR the whole season, no difference to them because the player would not count against their 20-man roster. But teams that use LTIR at convenient moments and then that player suddenly becomes available for the playoffs, that's it. So unfortunately, what this does is it kills my mother's dream of Carey Price coming back in the playoffs this spring or any other spring, because at the end of the day, that's $10 million. That would be $10 million to come back on. Obviously, this wouldn't happen, and these changes would only take place as of the 2027 playoffs. But it gives you an idea of where things are going. So that's not necessarily a limitation to Canadian teams, like the signing bonus and the limitation on front-loading contracts does. But this definitely puts a pin on these teams with injured players trying to pull a fast one. So I like the change. And the NHL has said within 2 years, they'd like to reopen that discussion to see if there's any other changes that they can make. I can think of a couple already off the top of my head, but it's good to see that the NHL is on this after trying to convince fans that GMs didn't have a problem with it.
That's Marco D'Amico. You could follow him at RG Media. Follow him at MN D'Amico on all your favorite socials. And thanks for liking and subscribing and checking us out.